so many of these roads lead back to marriage, and look at what's happened when we've dispensed with it. And I think there is something in the kind of mood of the country at the moment, whereby people generally dissatisfied. I think it's fair to say people are concerned about the state of our nation. People are concerned about the trajectory.
Welcome, Dave Brennan, Brephos, head of Brephos, one of the UK's abortion organisations. Now, before you jump up and down, I know we are Coalition for Marriage. Abortion is not our issue. Our issue is marriage being the definition of the thing which only one man and one woman can do, and our tens of thousands of supporters from all faiths and none support that. But actually, there's quite a link, it turns out. The latest ONS figures are out for 2022, and they show of the over 250,000 abortions that have taken place, nearly a third of all conceptions. Of that number, 82% of those took place to unmarried people. Most of those were cohabiting. So it turns out that the likelihood of having an abortion if you're married is 11% compared to the likelihood of having an abortion if you're unmarried, which is 36%. So it turns out that marriage is really, really important. And when we're looking at things like a fertility crisis, births at 1.4 in the UK per couple, whereas replacement is 2.1, it's significant because that difference is the number of abortions. And actually, married people have fewer abortions. Ergo, a really good policy initiative should be to promote marriage very, very strongly. Dave, tell us a bit about Brephos and maybe comment on some of those things I've said.
Thanks, Tony. Well, it's great to be on. Thanks so much for having me. It's a real privilege to speak with you about these things. And as you know, we're focusing at Brephos. We're an organisation that focuses on abortion specifically. Our particular emphasis within that movement is actually helping churches to teach on abortion. But I'm also involved in public education work. So Brephos is part of CBR UK, the Centre for Bioethical Reform. And we have a heavy emphasis on education. We have a saying, we don't protest abortion, we don't need to. We show it. We display what the unborn child is, what abortion is, and actually abortion protests itself. So we're very much about education, life in the womb, and the reality of abortion. But of course, the reason that I'm excited to have this conversation is, as you say, abortions don't happen in a vacuum. There is a wider picture here. And one thing that strikes me, and I don't know much about your listeners and those involved in your work. I'm aware perhaps some not Christians, some not people of faith. Whether they be pro-life or not, I can't assume. But one thing I find quite interesting about even those who would describe themselves as pro-choice is you very rarely get anyone who is comfortable with the abortion numbers where they are. Most people, even self-professed pro-choice people, would say it's not a good sign. It's not a sign of a well country that we have a situation where, as you say, we're getting towards 1 in 3 babies being killed in the womb, and the womb is actually the most dangerous place for a child to be. I think everyone has put it this way: no one grows up saying they want to have an abortion when they're older. You know, it's a sign of an unwell country, and of course, much of that goes back to the issue of marriage. Marriage being so foundational to the stability of children who are being brought up, and there are all sorts of studies. No doubt you've looked at the Centre for Social Justice and some of their data on the effects of marriage on outcomes for children across the board. Even secular people who may not believe in marriage in the same way that we do can acknowledge that this is the safe and stable place. It's the optimal place for children to grow up in. But of course, what we're talking about today is even for the child to be permitted to live and be born, we see a huge correlation there between marriage and the likelihood of abortion. And that's something which, for me is a sign of just how important marriage is for children. And also it helps us to think about, I'm interested in looking at this from both ways round. You've got the upstream, we could say, in terms of strengthening marriage to protect children. But we've also got a legislative situation, the status quo, where abortion is just so normalized that it becomes the obvious option. And that in turn I would say, undermines marriage. So I'm interested in discussing some of those things with you.
It's interesting because a lot of people, these days are saying there's no point in marriage. Cohabitation is exactly the same. What's the point of a certificate? And we constantly bang on about the evidence, which you've alluded to, but there's very strong empirical evidence from Institute of Fiscal Studies and other places that actually there is a big benefit. But either way, even in cohabiting couples, the likelihood of abortion is significantly higher than it is for married couples, and I'm wondering why that would be. I mean, that's another indication that, well, cohabitation obviously is fundamentally different to marriage if the abortion rate is so significantly higher.
Yeah, that's right. And part of the reason for that is, marriage is not just a piece of paper. Home ownership isn't just a piece of paper. It changes the entire setup. If you own your home, it comes with responsibilities, privileges, certain securities, and costs. It's not just a piece of paper. The piece of paper just records that fact. And there's something comparable with marriage. So cohabiting may have the appearance of similarity, but actually in the level of commitment, even the legal obligations and commitment, it's a completely different ball game. And so what you've got there is a setup which lacks that, in a sense, forethought and commitment, and even you could, to use a slightly crude term, sort of down payment. You're buying into marriage legally with your possessions. Now, if you strip all of that out and you're simply living together, the whole framing of it is fundamentally commitment free. Now, of course, case by case, some will say, well, no, we are committed, and that there may be informal verbal agreements. But again, in the world of business or ownership of cars or houses, we don't tend to say, well, just a verbal agreement does the trick. You need to sign, you need to exchange contracts or whatever. And marriage is more than a contract, it's a covenant. But there is something fundamentally different about a cohabiting couple compared to marriage, and something I find very tragic, and I've had conversations even just this week along these lines, is we so often speak with women who became pregnant, and their partners, their boyfriends, pressurized them to have the abortion and said, if you don't have the abortion, I'll leave you. And then they have the abortion, nice. And then they leave them anyway. Now, it simply is not as easy and straightforward to do that if you are married. You are committed. Of course, there is the issue nowadays of no-fault divorce, so-called. It's being made easier, but still there is a commitment and a buy-in that you have entered into that venture together, and that makes it a safer place for a child to live. Now, we know from science that human life begins at fertilization. So from that moment of conception, there is a human being. And whether it's in the womb or out of the womb, marriage makes life for that child safer at a physical level and emotional and so on. It's giving children the best chance in life to survive the womb, the most dangerous place to be, but also to flourish after that.
Yeah, and nobody can disagree that we're having a demographic or facing a demographic crisis. So a replacement rate of 1.4 means each generation shrinks by 30%. That's significant. Some people will foolishly say, oh, there are too many people in the world anyway. Well, that's absolute rubbish. We need people to pay their taxes, to work, to provide the funding which pays for the increasingly elderly population and generation that are ahead of them, etc., and to also bring forward the next generation. Apart from the arguments that, well, actually, in order to develop and progress as a nation, you just need lots of people, because from those lots of people come good ideas and bright ideas and all sorts of things and innovations and everything else like that. And we know as well from the stats that married people are more likely to have nearer the number of children than they want than cohabiting people. And you raise the interesting difference, so you mentioned the covenants and the fact that you're committing not just to each other, but you're committing to the institution, to something bigger than yourselves. And the difference being that when you're cohabiting, the proposition is, well, let's hook up until such time as you annoy me to the point of, I can't stand this anymore, or I find somebody better than you. How's that as a proposition? Compared to, I'm going to promise publicly that no matter what, I'm going to stick with you until I die. Now, there's a fundamental difference, between those two things. And really, you can see why one brings a certain output and the other doesn't, and why it brings benefits to the happiest people, according to Brad Wilcox, the happiest people in the world are married people with children. It brings the kind of health benefits that no pill could provide. It brings the kind of psychology benefits that no psychiatrist or psychologist could ever provide. The educational benefits, way beyond anything that we can do in the classroom in terms of boosting from one kind of output to another. It's amazing what it does. And I think from a policy point of view, we know we need more children. So marriage is a good thing to promote, but also in the context of, there's 250,000 children now over in 2022, the latest figures, who didn't see life, who were stopped from being 250,000. That is a lot. And 82% of those were outside of marriages. Yep. And the majority of those were two cohabiting couples. So clearly there's a big difference. And there's a policy invective, I would say, for the government to say, look, we need people to marry, because that really is a key way of addressing this issue of low birth rates.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a sort of pragmatic, even an economic argument, for what you're saying. So whether people share my Christian worldview or not, at an economic level, we are running into an absolute catastrophe. And if people want to dismiss that and say that's fear mongering, that's exaggeration, well, look at other countries who are taking these things seriously. It's quite interesting, actually. You look at the history of other nations around the world, and they've been down this route, and it's not ended well. Back in the 1920s, I believe it was, early 1920s, Russia actually had a very strong abortion policy, and they were performing a horrific rate of abortions. And they realized they were overdoing it from a population point of view. And so they quickly changed policy within just a few years in the 1920s and all but banned abortion, because they could see the economic impact of not having enough babies. Of course, China has reversed its one-child policy for similar reasons, and Japan realizes it's running into real problems with not having enough babies. I believe Italy also is coming to recognize this problem. So this is a real problem, and I think, as you say, it's uncanny. You could say the way in which the replacement rate gap correlates exactly to abortions. And the number of abortions correlates almost exactly, as you're saying, to the issue of marriage. It stands to reason that if all of those people were married, 80% of them would not be having those abortions. So
I mean, it's a correlative.
It is.
I who knows what's behind those figures? I could hazard a guess, but what I can't do is point to research that says for definite. But the correlation is pretty strong.
Yeah, and we're talking big numbers here. As you say, it's 250,000 every single year. So that it's a large amount of data, even if we aren't able to analyze causation as such. But it's yet another sign of the goodness of marriage. And again, as I say, even people who aren't completely pro-life, I think, could acknowledge that a nation that is aborting at that rate is an unhealthy nation. And I think what we see here is, obviously I'm a Christian. I believe that marriage is designed by God and is a good gift. And I think the goodness of marriage is observed over time. And we live in an instant gratification culture that doesn't want to stick around and wait to see how's this going to work out for me. And we kind of expect results today. But when we step back and look at it, whether, as you say, it's mental health or the welfare of children or the economy or physical health, the benefits of marriage just go on and on and on. And what we see there is actually the wisdom of God's word playing out in real life. And it's not observed necessarily instantly, but these general trends can be observed. And I think that's something that is very compelling when you take something that isn't necessarily is not the course of least resistance. Marriage takes work and commitment and so on, and yet the benefits are so clear. So yeah, from that economic population side of things, whether it's purely because of that or because of a conviction on the marriage front or the pro-life front, this is an issue we should all be looking at.
Yeah, no, it's no secret, Dave, that I'm a Christian too. I mean, Coalition for Marriage, we have supporters from all faiths and none, and we approach it, most of our supporters, would-be Christians, I would say, but certainly not all. And we approach marriage from a secular evidence base, and the secular evidence base is undeniable. All the things you've been talking about are evident and abundant in the international literature, in terms of social science and the supports of marriage, etc. But I don't know. My question always is, and I'm always looking for the little thing to nudge us forward. So what? So how? So where? I mean, you've mentioned churches, and my personal opinion is that churches are right in the middle of this, and they're part of the solution. At the moment, they're actually part of the problem, I have to say. Since the last legislation was debated in Parliament, churches are beginning to talk about abortion. Well, great, but where were you over the last 50 years when 10 million abortions took place? Similarly with marriage, it's, we don't want to talk about it because we don't want to offend single people, and we don't. Well, I think those days are kind of behind us now. We need people to get married. We need to prime the nation and have more kids and rescue society. Otherwise, we'll quickly cease to exist as a culture. Apart from encouraging churches, what are the hints and tips would you throw our way?
Yeah, well, I think, as you say, my work is predominantly in the churches, but I also have a foot in the sort of public square in our public education work, and I think there's a need and a place for making these arguments at multiple levels. So obviously, as a Christian, speaking to churches, I want to say, look, let's not be ashamed of God's design. It's good, and it shows itself to be good. It commends itself through, as you say, the secular evidence base. So we need to be unashamed about God's vision, because it is good, and we can show people it's good. But as I say, outside the church, we've got, as well as wanting to not impose but expose, if I might put it that way, the Christian vision for marriage, we can also just point at all these evidences of the goodness of marriage and the negative effects of when we dispense with marriage. It's a saying, isn't it? You don't know what you've got till it's gone. We have played loosely with marriage, and we've thought that we could have all the benefits that we didn't even realize came from marriage. We thought we could have the benefits without keeping hold of marriage itself. And I think there's something about walking people through the data, showing the connection between things. There's a kind of, we can't always establish causation irrefutably, but I think what you can do is you can show, even in our world, looking at the health impact of abortion itself on women's health, what you can do is you can show the correlation, but then you can also explain the intuitive, the sort of logical connection. That if you're doing something invasive and unnatural at that level, would we be surprised to find that there are these effects on a woman's physiology and psychology? And so, I think there are various ways we can approach this to convince people actually marriage. So many of these roads lead back to marriage, and look at what's happened when we've dispensed with it. And I think there is something in the kind of mood of the country at the moment, whereby people generally dissatisfied. I think it's fair to say people are concerned about the state of our nation. People are concerned about the trajectory. It's no secret we've got a mental health epidemic amongst teenage girls especially, but people generally. We've got so many people out of work, never working. There are so many issues. And I think there's an opportunity to kind of encourage people to ask, well, why do you think this is? How far can we trace this back? Do you see a correlation anecdotally in your own life between, the state of the home, the family, the marriage, and outcomes? And I think there's something about helping people to make the connection. We're in a culture that doesn't always make the connection. We have sort of, it's an Instagram culture. It's a picture. It's maybe a short tweet, but we need to help people to join up this thinking and see, well, where are these things coming from?
It's very good. And I'm ever the optimist, pathological optimist, in fact. I've been called as an insult, but I took it as a compliment, as a pathological optimist would. So similar to the abortion debate in the US, that the younger generation are now pro-life predominantly. And the reason that's been the case is simple, because pro-lifers have more kids, right? So it's just the way it works. Now, similarly, when you look at the stats, well, actually, fewer abortions, half and half in terms of babies being born in and outside of marriage, more abortions taking place outside of marriage than inside of marriage. Actually, there is hope that in time this might well, rectify itself in the round. And our job really is to do what we can to stop the rate of decay in the meantime. And so that, there's that hope too. But I agree with you. It's not a top-down thing we need here. It's a bottom-up thing. We're the people we've been waiting for. And I think it was, on the whole abortion debate, was it Schaefer that said, the only excuse for Christian civil disobedience is in objection to abortion.
Right, right.
And that's quite interesting. When I read that, I was going, oh, well, kind of makes sense, really. And we've had lots of things in the news all around that area anyway, as you well know. But Dave Brennan, I'm grateful for your take. You clearly are one of the organisations involved in the abortion debate that is pro-marriage, which is fantastic, and I hope more will join. Keep up the good work. Speak to you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony. Thanks for having me.